Hey guys, Brian from Boas here. People are obsessed with the size of their pet boas, and one of the most common things you see discussed on the social media is the size of the boa, how big boa should be, and whether a boa is too big, too small, obese, etc. And one thing you don't really see discussed a lot is the girth of a boa and what is a normal girth for a specific type of boa. By girth I mean the thickness in comparison to the length. And there are obvious differences in the girth to length ratio for different types of boas. Some boas are longer, skinnier, which is normal for them, like this Pearl Island boa. Other boas are shorter, stouter, more robust, which is also normal for them. And we always think about boas as being of a certain body type, so they're more robust and thick than something like a retic or carpet python that tends to be longer and skinnier, but not quite as thick and robust as something like a blood python or ball python that's shorter and stockier. However, there are quite a bit of differences in the thicknesses of different types of locality boas, of different locations or different subspecies, and that's what I'm going to discuss in today's video. And this is an important topic to keep in mind because you can't really tell if your boa is a healthy weight or if it's overweight or underweight unless you really understand what is normal for that type of boa. When we think about a boa like this Pearl Island boa that is very long and kind of skinny in comparison to its length, more like a carpet python or a retic, boas like this typically are very active, and they're typically arboreal, or they live in the trees. They're always on the move, and that's why they have this very long body plan. This Pearl Island boa in the wild lives in the trees. They eat a lot of birds, and it's advantageous for them to have this very long body form. And why this is important is because you might have a Pearl Island boa that you think is okay as far as its size, but it's really obese. It's not going to be quite as obese or thick as a, let's say, a Colombian boa that's obese. But for a Pearl Island boa, it's normal for them to be quite skinny. So this particular animal is a 5-year-old young adult male who's about 6 feet long, but he's not as thick as, say, a true red-tail, Suriname true red-tail that's 6 feet long, quite a bit thinner. The other thing that we want to consider is that boas that are short and stocky, for example, like the Bolivian or arboreal boa, these animals typically are more terrestrial. They live more on the ground. They're not as active. They don't move around as much. In the wild, they tend to kind of more sit still and wait for food to come to them. Whereas these elongated arboreal boas like this one tend to be more on the move. They're looking for food. Another example are the Amazon tree boas. Those are very elongated boas, and they have a body form that's similar to this Pearl Island. In fact, they're probably even more elongated compared to their girth. Another reason why this is important to a pet owner is that the more active, more slender boas typically will need a larger cage for their given size, their given length, than a animal that's more kind of robust and stocky, since those more robust, stocky animals don't move around as much. So, for example, these Pearl Island boas, an animal like this probably would need at least a 6-foot cage because they do move around quite a bit. The Pearl Island boas, I should add, they're definitely not dwarf boas. Some people have this misunderstanding that because they're island boas, they're dwarfs, and I see this all the time on social media. They are not dwarfs. I have adult females that are over 8 feet long. They're about twice as thick as this guy. And believe me, they're not dwarfs. They need larger cages. They move around a lot. So don't get a Pearl Island boa thinking it's a dwarf because it's an island boa. So now I want to show you some examples of different types of boas that have different body morphs from my collection. And the obvious place to start is, of course, the Pearl Island boa. These are probably the most elongated type of locality boa. And as I mentioned, they're highly arboreal in the wild. They're quite active and they move around a lot. And these animals are so unique that they were originally classified in a different genus, Epicrides, along with the rainbow boa, and they were moved as a subspecies of boa constrictor around 100 years ago or so, and then they were reclassified as a subspecies of Boa imperator about 15 years ago, when Boa imperator was considered a separate species. And again, they're more like a carpet python or reticulated python in terms of their body morph. I'm going to show you guys boas in order from more slender and elongated to less slender and elongated, more girthy and stocky. And the next, which is also quite a slender elongated boa, is one that you might not realize falls in this category, and that's the Argentine boa, Boa constrictor occidentalis. And these animals are actually quite elongated. This is actually a 2-year-old female holdback. She's about 5 feet long. She's not quite as elongated as that Pearl Island we just saw, but pretty close. And these animals have been getting optimal feeding. They haven't been stunted. They're actually growing longer, a lot faster than my true red tails and some of my other types of boas, but they just don't get that thick. They just get long. And another attribute of these more elongated boas comes to the handling. Because they're active, it's a different handling experience. They don't want to hold still as much when you take them out, as you can see with this Argentine. They also don't wrap as much. They kind of more drape. They're used to moving through trees, so they're kind of draping in the branches, versus some of the more robust, thick boas, like the true red tails, are going to wrap around your arm a lot more. And depending upon what you're looking for in a pet boa, this might be a plus or a minus. Some people like taking out their boa and it just wraps around their arms and kind of chills out there, doesn't move around a lot. But with these Argentines, you can see they do move around a lot. They're not going to wrap around your arm and sit still. So, take that into account. The Argentines, of course, do get quite large. An adult can be over 8 feet long. As adults, my adults are a little bit more stocky in proportion to their length as my juveniles here, but they're still what I would classify as one of the more elongated boas, which is something to consider if you're thinking about getting an Argentine boa as a pet. Next, we're getting more into the range of kind of middle of the road animals that aren't completely elongated, but they're also not completely stocky. And I have kind of an interesting example between these two island boas. This is a qualkey and a cockerkey boa, both from small islands off the coast of Belize. And they both have a common ancestor that somehow made it to these islands, probably tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago. But what's interesting is I've noticed that the cockerkeys tend to be more robust and thick and muscular compared to the qualkeys that tend to be a little bit more slender, a little bit more active than the cockerkeys. And this isn't based on any precise morphometric scientific analysis. This is anecdotal based on my own experiences. It's also based on not too many animals, but it does appear to be true that these cockerkeys in general are kind of a little bit more thick. They don't move around as much. They hold on a little bit more tightly, versus the qualkeys are a little bit more slender and they tend to move around quite a bit more. Be interesting to do an actual scientific study with a precise morphometric analysis and try to correlate this with their habits in their their natural habitat on these islands. But anyway, something you can consider if you're looking into getting a dwarf boa. They're both great pets. They're both really interesting animals to work with. What we have here, these are both 2024 born animals that are about a year and a half old. So they'll get quite a bit bigger than this, but still stay on the smaller side, between 4 and 5 feet long. And they're two really cool dwarf locality boas to work with, just a little bit different in terms of their body morphology. Now we're going to look at a few boas that are on the more stocky side of the spectrum. And these guys kind of embody the epitome of what people think about when they think of boa constrictors. They just have this really nice, muscular, robust body. And the first is the Colombian boa. This is a branchia female. This is a female who had her first litter earlier this year, and she's recovered quite nicely, put a lot of the weight back on. Not going to be breeding in 2026. Give her a year off, but certainly much stockier than she was after she had the litter. And these branchia animals, as I mentioned quite a bit before, are probably my favorite locality boa. I just love the color, I love the contrast, the pattern, the behavior, and I love the body shape. They're just really stocky animals, really muscular, really what you would imagine when you're thinking about a pet boa constrictor. These guys are just kind of the epitome of that. And I would say overall they're similar in body shape to the true red tails. Not quite as squeezy as the true red tails, a little bit more relaxed, which makes them a little bit easier to handle. Probably maybe a little bit more active than some of the true red tails. But it's also, each animal's different, so they're all going to have their own individual behavior. But this is definitely more of a stocky animal. Most snakes are not this stocky. If you think about like a colubrid or a venomous snake, in general snakes tend to be longer and move a lot more than what you would think is the epitome of the boa, like a boa like this, a Colombian branchia boa. But a real nice example of one of the more stocky types of boas that people keep as pets. And of course, another animal on the more stocky end of the spectrum are the true red-tailed boas like the Suriname. This is a 2021 born male holdback. I call this guy Pink Floyd. Beautiful animal from my Prometheus bloodline. Got a lot of really nice Surinames now. A lot of nice animals I can take on camera. I'll have to do a video just all of these Surinames that I've been holding back over the last few years. But this guy will probably go into breeding trials maybe in 2027. We'll have to see. But the Surinames and other red tails, they've got more of the stocky body plan. Kind of more of an more of like a square shaped body versus like the more elongated boas like the Pearl Island and Argentine have a little bit more rounded body. These guys are really square. They can often be ventrally flattened, and the height of the boa is taller than the thickness of the boa, and you can just really sense the muscle. And this guy's no exception. Just lots of dense muscle there. He can really hold on tight. And then depending upon their individual personality, some Surinames are calmer than others. This guy is kind of in between. He's kind of moving around a little bit, but kind of checking things out. Some of them are like super laid back, super calm. They just kind of hold on. They don't move around much. Others kind of go a little bit more spastic when you take them out. Of course, regular handling helps. But your Suriname is an example of one of the more stocky types of boa. I don't have an example of what I would consider to be the most stocky, which is the arboreal, like the Bolivian boas. Those guys are really, really stocky, almost to the point of looking like, like a ball python or blood python. They're really thick, kind of more short. And as I've mentioned, because of their body size, body morphology, they don't really move around as much as some of the other boas. And they tend to be more terrestrial in nature when they're, as far as their habitat. Not as much of a climber like some of the more elongated boas. But I got one more boa to show you as far as this discussion of the morphology. Here we have a Tarahumara boa, which are boas that are a little bit more on the robust side. And their behaviors also reflect this. The Tarahumaras, when you take them out, they don't move around a whole lot, which I kind of like. They're just really chill boas. They just kind of want to hang out. Kind of like a ball python, to be honest. Ball pythons don't really move around a whole lot when you take them out. They're not quite as thick and robust as a ball python, but definitely not nearly as elongated as some of the other boas we looked at. And this is an adult female. She actually had a litter earlier this year. She's put some of the weight back on. Won't be breeding in 2026, but maybe in 2027. But this will show you the maximum size of these Tarahumara boas. Really great boa if you don't have a lot of space, but you really want the boa experience in a much more manageable size. You can even keep an animal like this in like a 4-foot cage, 4x2, for its entire life. So great boa if you're a little bit more limited on space. And I also really like the personality of these guys. They're really chill. They more of a boa. They kind of wants to sit with you on the couch, watch the TV. Doesn't really move around a lot. As babies, they hiss quite a bit, but it's all a bluff. And I don't think I've ever actually been bitten by a Tarahumara. They just don't bite. They just bluff by hissing. So cool boa, an example of one that's the more robust, short, stocky body plan. I just wanted to finish the video by commenting on boas that don't neatly fall into one locality, which is actually the majority of boas on the market and the pet trade are not true locality boas. And this is virtually all the morph boas. It can sometimes be a mixture of animals from different localities. But by and large, these animals are predominantly Colombian and or Central American in origin. Here's an example of an IMG snow, born here in 2024. And these animals have a similar body morph as that branchia female I showed you, since they're largely Colombian in origin. So you can expect most morph boas to have kind of a more robust body plan like this one, kind of what you would think of as being the epitome of the boa constrictor shape. And again, it has to do with their largely Colombian ancestry, although there are exceptions and every morph boa is going to be a little bit different. Anyway, I hope this gave you guys some food for thought when you're thinking about your boa's body and why they have a certain body plan, why they behave in certain ways, and also how this affects their care in captivity. Shoot me any questions or comments you have. Hope this was helpful. Thanks for watching and enjoy your boas.